Let's talk about something I have wrestled with throughout my career. It's what I now call the empathy accountability paradox. It shows up everywhere in families, workplaces, activism, and leadership. It's the question at the heart of so many dilemmas. Can we love deeply and still demand real change? Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated 57 years ago this week. And the text for this morning's sermon comes from Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, "Where do we go from here?" He said, "Power, properly understood, is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with the resignation of power and power with the denial of love. Now we've got to get this thing right. What we need to realize is that power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. It is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time." I don't think these words could be more timely. Now, before the reading, I mentioned the empathy accountability paradox and said that it shows up everywhere, in families, workplaces, activism, and leadership. It's the question at the heart of so many dilemmas. Can we love deeply and still demand real change? We've all felt that tension. I see it in families who want to help a grown child by paying her rent or covering her phone bill, yet fear turning support into dependency. Where do you draw the line between loving generously and healthy boundaries? I see it in businesses that haven't yet discovered how to fuse compassion with profit. These organizations worry that more flexible hours or better benefits or letting people actually work from home might hurt their bottom line. Meanwhile, many of us know that genuine employee care often sparks productivity and loyalty. I also see it in our social justice movements. We want real, measurable progress toward equity and freedom, yet sometimes we hesitate to slow down for empathy, fearing that urgent goals might stall. Each of these domains presents a version of the same paradox. Can we love deeply and still demand real change? Can we provide support without losing sight of essential boundaries? This sermon wrestles with that tension head on, inviting us to see how empathy and accountability are not enemies, but necessary partners in our personal lives, our workplaces, and our national debates. Can we love deeply and still demand real change? Let's explore this together. Years ago, early in my management career, I thought I was doing the right thing when I dressed down an employee in front of a customer. The customer had been upset. I wanted to show I was taking them seriously. But instead of building trust, I created shame for the employee, for myself, and even for the customer, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. That moment taught me something the hard way. When an effort at accountability undermines dignity, it will backfire. I've never forgotten how it felt to sacrifice empathy in the name of credibility. Across family dinner tables, corporate boardrooms, and even national policy debates, people struggle with the same tension: how to offer genuine compassion while expecting real results. In my work as a leadership coach, I encounter executives who treat accountability as a strict numbers game, only to realize that handing down performance targets without listening can backfire. One manager shared a story with me about leading a remote sales team at the start of the COVID crisis. Pressured by his higher-ups to push firm standards, he imposed quotas and weekly metrics, But morale continued to waver, and the team's numbers never budged. Over time, he saw that fear and stress were slamming hard on the brakes. He changed his approach. He told his own manager, "This group needs a hug. They need a boss hug." And he gave them space for personal support, career development, and small wins. He knew they weren't going to make their numbers that first year. In fact, he told his boss they were going to be bad, and they were bad. But the next year, they exceeded their goals. The team rebounded with more trust and engagement. It seems maybe we can love deeply and still demand real change. While I'm not a parent, I have heard from clients who are that a blend of care and high expectations can be just as effective in a parenting context, where nurturing a child's growth sometimes requires letting them stumble while still setting firm rules. In activism, where UUs have long experience, you've probably seen that same balance comes into play. For an example, we can look at Greenpeace Canada. They faced a burnout crisis when staff were constantly on, sacrificing personal time and family needs for the sake of the cause. The executive director eventually reached a breaking point and recognized that the organization's relentless pace was unsustainable. Rather than telling staff to practice more self-care, as many leaders would, the organization's leadership restructured workloads, rolled out a 4-day work week, and made caring for employees part of their core mission. The surprising result was not just better morale and higher retention, but stronger campaigns, proof that prioritizing empathy doesn't undermine accountability. In fact, it can heighten a team's capacity for meaningful change. It seems we can love deeply and still demand real change. Empathy and accountability can feel like two opposing forces. Empathy says, "I see your pain and I care," while accountability says, "I need you to step up and meet the standard." Most of us fear one of those two sides, becoming too permissive or too harsh. We've seen families unravel when empathy turns into permissiveness. We've seen workplaces grind down morale when accountability becomes too rigid. We're seeing it now on the national stage when, power is definitely overcoming love. The challenge is how to hold both compassion and responsibility in the same hand. And so I turn to someone who said it best. King wrote that power without love is reckless and abusive, while love without power is sentimental and anemic. Think about that contrast. Accountability without empathy can become a cold, joyless pursuit of perfection or chaos. But empathy without accountability can feel warm but aimless. Dr. King challenges both tendencies. For him, real power is the strength to achieve meaningful change, and real love does not ignore the necessity of action and responsibility. Our society, enamored as it is with certainty and control, oftentimes treats compassion as a weakness. But as King reminds us, love and power are not polar opposites. They need one another to transform the world justly. Compassion in that sense is not an optional soft skill. It is part of the power that lifts up human dignity, even as we challenge each other to grow. Can we love deeply and still demand real change? Empathy and accountability might feel like opposites, but they actually depend on each other. Accountability without empathy treats people like problems. Empathy without accountability never calls anyone to grow. But when I see your potential and believe in your dignity, I want you to succeed. And that means both supporting you and holding you to your commitments. That's not just kindness. That's transformation. From a spiritual perspective, nearly every faith tradition calls us to balance compassion and justice. For Unitarian Universalists, our principles affirm every person's inherent worth and dignity, while at the same time reminding us we live in an interdependent web. Compassion without an expectation of responsible action falls short of genuine love. Responsibility without recognizing each person's humanity falls short of justice. When we unite compassion and responsibility, we embody these values in a way that fosters both connection and transformation. One of my clients, a manager, frontline manager, inherited a longtime employee of the organization whose performance had dipped after being transferred into her department. He had cycled through multiple managers, and each one seemed to brand him as a bare minimum performer. And so senior leadership was starting to urge my client to manage him out. My client felt torn, though. She feared being seen as weak or naive or rebellious, but she also felt a tug of conviction. This person deserved a fresh start. Rather than rushing to that termination, she opted for an approach that balanced empathy with firm expectations. First, she clarified exactly what acceptable performance meant, explaining key metrics for both quantity and quality. Then she implemented regular audits conducted by a diverse team to reduce bias. She offered honest feedback early and often, focusing on measurable data while still acknowledging the employee's frustrations with previous management. She also took time to investigate deeper issues, uneven training, a mismatch in skill sets, and personal stressors. Over the course of several months, the employee gradually raised his performance level. He met the clarified standards, and the organization did not have to lose his useful language skills. By dedicating effort to truly hearing the employee's perspective and by setting clear, consistent boundaries, my client showed that empathy and accountability can coexist and lead to transformation. Her story reminds us we can love deeply and still demand real change. What if empathy and accountability were not at odds but traveled together, hand in hand? We could lead with both heart and courage, challenging each other to step up while recognizing that every person carries unseen burdens. Accountability would become a catalyst for growth rather than a tool for punishment. We could extend grace, acknowledge mistakes, welcoming second chances without excusing real harm. And by speaking truth in love, we would build trust that stands the test of setbacks and frustrations. This is not naive optimism, but a call to see what can happen when we hold each other in high regard and high expectation at the same time. Today, many of us feel our values are under assault by sweeping, usually draconian policy changes. We grieve, we rage, and sometimes we want to lash out or shut down. In this climate, compassion and responsibility are not luxuries. They are critical tools for preserving our integrity and moving toward justice. When we talk about empathy, it means more than being nice. It means that we see that people, especially those who are targeted by these harsh measures, are suffering real harm. We let their struggles pierce our hearts so deeply that we cannot help but respond. Compassion draws us into solidarity with those on the margins, but compassion alone can leave us overwhelmed and directionless if we don't hold ourselves responsible for taking wise action. Responsibility, then, is our commitment to do something constructive with our concern. We ask, what steps can I take? Maybe we volunteer with an advocacy group. donate to legal defense funds, or attend local protests. If we feel powerless, we reconnect with the UU principle of interdependence. Our individual choices, emails to representatives, phone calls, donations, add up when multiplied by many compassionate people. Responsibility means we refuse the easy route of cynicism or self-righteous anger, staying focused on the tangible ways to effect change. Compassion without responsibility can become a paralyzing sadness. Responsibility without compassion can harden into bitterness. By combining the two, we stay rooted in love while pushing back against policies and rhetoric that violate our sense of dignity and fairness. Rather than dehumanize those who promote harmful agendas, we hold firm in our moral convictions. We remain clear-eyed about injustice, but we also recognize no one changes from being shamed. The path forward involves courageous defiance of cruelty and an unwavering commitment to seeing each person's humanity, even when we condemn their actions. For Unitarian Universalists, this balance of compassion and responsibility is rooted in both our spiritual values and our shared governance. We honor the inherent worth of all people, but we also know the beloved community cannot flourish unless we hold one another to the highest standards of honesty and decency. That means challenging the harmful leadership at every level, family, local, national, corporate, or otherwise, while staying faithful to our calling to love. In times like these, compassion and responsibility act as guardrails that keep us from despair on one side and dehumanizing outrage on the other. It is in that tension, that paradox, that transformative power is born. We must love deeply and still demand real change. We have the power to lean into this paradox with courage. We can offer compassion without excusing harmful behavior. We can set high standards without losing our humanity. This effort requires ongoing curiosity, humility, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. Let us step out today, remembering that we hold each other in love and call each other to growth. We stand on the shoulders of those who believed in both justice and mercy, conviction and kindness. May we follow their example. May we find in this paradox the path toward stronger relationships, healthier communities, and a more just world. And who knows? Maybe later today, you will find yourself facing a moment where empathy and accountability seem at odds. If so, remember this. You are not alone in that tension, and you don't have to choose one over the other.